Hello, Professor Mikey here with a special edition of Old School in celebration of the Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. This is 1964, a Beatles story.
Have you met any interesting American girls?
Not yet. We're hoping.
What do you think of the police protection you've been receiving here in the city?
It's marvelous. They're doing a great job, looking after us.
Are the crowds as large as you expected?
No, we didn't expect anything like this, no.
What's the most interesting offer you've ever received?
Oh, yes. We had a lot of interesting offers, actually. No comment.
Why, hello, dear. Now tell me quickly, which one are you? Sheila Graham to George Harrison. We came out of nowhere with funny hair, looking like marionettes or something. That was very influential. I think that was really one of the big things that broke us. The hairdo more than the music originally. A lot of people's fathers had wanted to turn us off. They told their kids, don't be fooled. They're wearing wigs. Paul McCartney. The build-up was boss, fab, gear. The Beatles had been wowing England since January of 1963, when Please Please Me had topped their charts. Without an internet or an American label push, their reach across the Atlantic had been dragged. When George Harrison visited his sister in the summer of '63, news of it barely rippled. One local newspaper said the next Elvis Presley was visiting. When his sister Louise introduced her brother that was yet to be called the Quiet Beatle, her friends just didn't get it. The going rate for a phenom on The Sullivan Show was $50,000 for 3 performances, set in 1956 by Elvis Presley. In November of 1963, Ed was visiting London when he offered Beatles manager Brian Epstein $10,000 for one performance. Brian was aware of the Elvis number, but more than the money, he was interested in the exposure. He countered with an offer that his Beatles would play 3 shows for the same amount if they could open and close each show. Ed thought he'd gotten the best of them. All the goodwill hit the fan the night of January 3rd when NBC's Tonight Show host Jack Parr aired some BBC footage of the Beatles wowing swinging London. Ed wanted to be the first, and he was pissed. Brian wanted Ed to be the first, and he was pissed, charging his lawyers to rattle legal swords at the BBC. The network felt its pain, but could not take back time. Ed railed and threatened, but cooler heads prevailed. The show was on.
Good afternoon, ladies
The
and gentlemen.
Beatles,
We'd like
their
to welcome you on
entourage,
board
and a crew of
Flight
British
100.
journalists on Pan Am Flight 101 from Heathrow landed at JFK Friday, February 5th. The band emerged, waved to thousands of screaming fans, and were hustled straight to their first American press conference. A cheeky affair of thick Liverpudlian quips, cigarettes, and a refusal to sing a song. "We need money first," said John.
Who came up with the name Beatles, and what does it really mean?
John thought of the name Beatles, and he'll tell you about it now.
All right.
It means Beatles, doesn't it? That's just a name, like shoe.
Well,
Shoe.
the shoes. You see, we could have been called the shoes for all you know.
Then it was off in the limo, radio blasting. We were so overawed by American radio, Epstein had to stop us. We phoned every radio in town saying, "Will you play the Ronettes doing this?" We wanted to hear the music. We didn't ask for our own records. We asked for other people's. In the old days, we listened to Elvis, of course, Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins, Little Richard, and Eddie Cochran. But now we liked Marvin Gaye, The Miracles, Shirelles, all those people. John Lennon.
There have been huge crowds of teenage girls outside complaining that they don't want to mob you, they just want to speak to you. What do you think about this? Do you want to talk to them?
Well, have you ever tried talking to about 200 people at once? We'd love to, We never... If we all wave and somebody always says, "Stop that waving, you're inciting them."
If there was any worry, it was over George Harrison's health. He'd been out of the groove since a series of Paris shows. All he wanted to do was check into the interconnecting 10 rooms in the suites that had been rented on the 12th floor of the Plaza Hotel and get to bed. On Saturday, John, Paul, and Ringo strolled forth into the drizzle of Central Park for photos. Then they visited the CBS studio on 53rd Street, where they were required to join AFTRA, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, before performing on live television. George stayed down, the doctors having put his sister Louise in charge of his care. Exactly what was troubling him has been reported as tonsillitis, strep, flu. His temperature was 104 on Saturday afternoon, and Harrison missing the big show was a real possibility. Road manager Neil Aspinall stood in for camera run-throughs on Sunday. Said early biographer Hunter Davies in The Beatles, the authorized biography, McGraw-Hill, 1968, George was by this time ill in bed, and it appeared he would miss the Ed Sullivan Show. Neil stood in for the rehearsal, but George managed the show filled with dope. His wit was the first thing to heal. The famed well-wishing telegram arrived backstage, signed from Elvis and the Colonel, and George answered, "Elvis who?" That Sunday afternoon, before the first live broadcast, they taped their segment for the third Sullivan appearance that would run on February 23rd after their return to England. Sandwiched in between, the second show would come February 16th in sunny Miami. There, they rehearsed in swimsuits, were photographed in a pool for the cover of Life magazine, and visited Cassius Clay at the gym where he was training for his upcoming title fight with Sonny Liston. Competition for Sunday night viewing on February 9th included Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color with an episode of a Robin Hood series, Grendel, a sitcom with Imogene Coca, and Arrest and Trial, a 90-minute drama on ABC, rounded out the three-network lineup. A whopping 60% of American televisions tuned to Ed and CBS. The Reverend Billy Graham said he broke his rule of no TV on the Sabbath to see what the fuss was all about. Brian Epstein paced, nervous and precise. At one point, as the countdown had begun, he collared Sullivan and said, "I would like to know the exact wording of your introduction." Ed barked back, "I would like you to get lost." Then it was showtime, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. The same viewing community wouldn't get together in these numbers until a man walked on the moon. The hype had hit big. Now it was time to see if the Brits with a big song could back it up. 73 million people, all there for put up or shut up time. Sullivan greeted his live audience of 728. That many out of 50,000 had gotten in. Walter Cronkite and Richard Nixon had both pulled strings for their daughters' tickets. Leonard Bernstein got turned down. Our master of ceremonies raised his hands, the hard-nosed newspaper columnist who had fought his way to the top in his own dull but special way. "Quiet down, kids. These are ambassadors of goodwill." He cited the Elvis telegram and threw the show to commercials from AeroShave and Griffin shoe polish.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, live from New York, the Ed Sullivan Show. And now, here he is, Ed Sullivan.
Thank you very much. You know, something very nice happened, and the Beatles got a great kick out of it. We just received a wire, they did, from Elvis Presley and Colonel Tom Parker, wishing them a tremendous success in our country. And I think that was very, very nice. Now, tonight, the whole country is waiting to hear England's Beatles, and you're going to hear them, and they're tremendous ambassadors of goodwill after this commercial.
Clean-shaved and shoe-shined, America was back.
Now, yesterday and today, our theater's been jammed with newspapermen and hundreds of photographers from all over the nation, and these veterans agree with me that the city never has witnessed the excitement stirred by these youngsters from Liverpool who call themselves the Beatles. Now, tonight, you're going to twice be entertained by them. Right now, and again in the second half of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
First song, All My Loving. Video from Ed Sullivan Show unavailable. Author, McCartney 100%. It was the first song I ever wrote where I had the words before the music. I wrote the words on a bus on tour, then we got the tune when I arrived there. Paul McCartney. All My Loving is Paul, I regret to say, but it's a damn good piece of work. But I play a pretty mean guitar and back. John Lennon. First recorded July 30th, 1963, Abbey Road, 13 takes. Second song, Till There Was You. Video from The Ed Sullivan Show unavailable. Author Meredith Willson for the 1957 Broadway musical The Music Man, originally sung by Robert Preston and Barbara Cook. Note, during the Sullivan Show, this was the song where their first names were superimposed because many were still trying to figure out who was who. Paul, Ringo, George, John, Sorry Girls, He's Married. First recorded July 18th and 30th, 1963, Abbey Road, 8 takes. Third song, She Loves You. Author, Lennon 50%, McCartney 50%. It was written together. It was Paul's idea. Instead of singing I Love You Again, we'd have a third party, John Lennon. Written in a Newcastle hotel room after a performance June 26, 1963. Released in the UK August 23, 1963, entering the charts at number 2. Stayed at number 1 for 6 total non-consecutive weeks and sold 1.3 million copies, the biggest hit in the UK in 1963. Capitol and VJ refused to release in the U.S. after the poor performances by the previous 2 singles. Epstein persuaded Swan Records to release it, and it spent 14 weeks on the U.S. charts. The week it hit number 1 in March, the Beatles had 5 songs in the Billboard Top 40. It was the group's first million seller. First recorded July 1st, 1963, Abbey Road, takes unknown. Following those first 3 songs, magician Fred Capps got the honor of flipping through some card tricks. He was followed by members of the Broadway cast of Oliver, singing I'll Do Anything. Future monkey Davy Jones performed with the ensemble that night, and he was a little Dickens. Next, Georgia Gibbs of the same ensemble performed As Long as He Needs Me. Impressionist Frank Gorshin, 2 years out from donning the green question mark tights for the Riddler role on TV's Batman, was next introduced. His bit was, wouldn't it be funny if Hollywood personalities decided they wanted to get into politics? The fantasy ran on with imagined campaign speeches by Broderick Crawford, Marlon Brando, and Kirk Douglas. A medley from Ireland's Tessie O'Shea, 51, followed. The peroxide pumpkin turns into a boisterous Cinderella, the New York Times had said in a recent show review. Then the rushed comedy of McCall and Brill. Fourth song, I Saw Her Standing There. Author, McCartney 80%, Lennon 20%. The authors say the song was written in Paul's living room while playing hooky. John Lennon. That's Paul doing his usual good job of what George Martin used to call a pot boiler. I helped with a couple of lyrics. John Lennon. Working title, 17. B-sides in the U.S. of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Recorded February 11th, 1963, Abbey Road, 17 takes. Fifth song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Author Lennon 50%, McCartney 50%. We wrote a lot of stuff together, one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball. We were in Jane Asher's house, downstairs in the cellar, playing on the piano at the same time. Paul hits this chord, and I turn to him and say, "That's it," I said. "Do that again." In those days, we really used to absolutely write like that, both playing into each other's noses. John Lennon. Recorded October 17th, 1963, Abbey Road, 17 takes. Notes. Released in the UK November 29th, 1963, debuted at number 1, and stayed for 7 weeks. By January 17th, 1964, sold 1.5 million. Released in the U.S. January 13th, 1964, after being leaked unofficially since before Christmas. First U.S. number 1, held that position for 7 weeks and spent another 14 in the top 40. Capitol Records finally got on board. The huge sum of $50,000 was spent to promote just this single, and receptionists were instructed to answer the phones. Capitol Records, the Beatles are coming.
I don't know what you risked by missing school, but why are you here today?
Well, we started out, but the bus got stuck, and it was already 9 o'clock, and we were late, so we figured, let's go down to the Flash just for the fun of it and see, maybe they'll be, out or something. And we figured that since it's snowing, nobody would be around, because it's so cold out, so we came down.
How long do you plan to stay here today?
I have to go home because my mother, I have to go home about 15, 20 more minutes. Because we're not going to get in, that's obvious.
Have you tried getting in the hotel?
No, but I know two other girls that did, and they made it all the way up to the 12th floor, and then one of the policemen got them and brought them all the way down again. I mean, there's no way you can possibly get in to see them.
Will you keep trying while they're in town to get in to see them?
Yes, we will. For Carnegie Hall, I haven't got any tickets, but I'm going to leave my house at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to try to get in. I don't have any tickets. They were all sold out when I called up.
What would you do if one of them actually stopped on the way out from the hotel and started talking to you?
I would talk back. I'd ask them, how they like America, what do they think of, American girls. I don't think I'd be too nervous. I don't know. Maybe I would, but that would never happen, so.
The Beatles were almost the last act. Perhaps adrenaline had kicked in for the performers. The show was a little short, so standby acrobats got to tumble for their lives in front of an audience they could never have imagined. Hey! Following the show, disc jockey Murray the K, who'd been adopting the band on his daily show on WINS radio, took the three healthy Beatles to chow at the Playboy Club. George went back to bed. From dinner, the entourage boogalooed to the Peppermint Lounge at 128 West 45th Street in Manhattan, where they danced until 4 a.m. For such a world and culture-changing event, much of the media chose to play things reserved and underwhelmed, responding more to a shipment of 35,000 Beatle wigs arriving in New York than what Ed Sullivan had wrought the night before. The New York Herald said the Beatles were 75% publicity, 20% haircut, and 5% lilting lament. Asexual and homely, snipped the Washington Post in a terse dismissal. The best reviews came from law enforcement. It was reported that the crime rate in America was lower during the show than at any time in the past half-century. New York police precincts noted a drop in juvenile crime. All 5 boroughs reported 0 hubcap theft during the entire Sullivan airing. Note, Snopes reported in our era that this was an urban legend. But it's a great urban legend. The Beatles on Ed Sullivan was the giddiest high point of the 60s, a turbulent and joyful conclusion to the first wild weekend of the British invasion. Much of the audience thought this was the apogee of the ultimate for the Fab Four, still clueless of what had just launched. Others were gobsmacked on the epiphany level, drawn to rock, roll, and originality in ways that had never occurred to them. Within a decade, analysts would be asking their clients their favorite Beatle as a first insight into their souls. Recalling the event on her 59th wedding anniversary with her husband Charlie Brill in 2014, Mitzi McCall remembered, "For us, it was lousy. It was terrible. We were doing a sketch. We couldn't hear each other because of the screaming." After a pause, she reflected and referred to the evening as sort of an honor. We were there when the world changed. This has been February 1964, a Beatles story on Old School. I'm Professor Mikey, urging you to go over and take out a free subscription to my newsletter, which is ProfessorMikey@Substack.com. We have videos, we have songs, we have all the things that copyright wouldn't allow this audiobook version of the story. I just wanted to tell it to you. See you next time on Old School. Yeah.
Magazine writers and photographers have been so darn kind to the Beatles and to us. First of all, I want to congratulate you. You've been a fine audience despite severe provocation. Now, next Sunday, our show originates at Miami Beach from the Deauville Hotel. Now, I'm delighted, all of us are delighted, and I know the Beatles on their first appearance here have been very deeply thrilled by their reception here. You've been fine. Now get home safely. Good night.